Another theory is that there's a portion of the electorate that has a preference for fascism. This was a theory formulated after World War II, not so well by people like Theodore Adorno, I apologize, who had an idea of the authoritarian personality theory. But that's been criticized a lot, but there's been a lot of research since that has suggested that there are certain conditions under which people will support fascist policies more than others. And I think it seems reasonably appealing, in part because there's a rich history in the U.S. Of public politicized social intolerance, most famously with the two Red Scares in the 20th century. But there have been many political crises in the U.S. before, and it's not clear to me what about these conditions are making it more conducive to fascism than in the past. Say when, in 1968 or something like that, or when there were riots. And there have been lots of fascist groups in the U.S., and none of them have been successful. And this guy is... People compare Trump to Hitler. I think that's not fair. People compared Trump to Mussolini. It's much closer. But even then, he's still... Those people were committed to their ideologies. I'm not sure that he is. Maybe he is awakening some fascist desires in certain people, but we're not even sure he's a fascist, right? We don't know. We really don't know. We have no idea what he thinks, so I'm not sure it explains it either. Another theory is demographic shifts are to blame. The underlying change perhaps inspiring the attraction to fascism, and something that is underlying a lot of the other explanations that we've talked about so far, is long-term demographic change in the US. I think this is probably the most comprehensive explanation that I've heard, and certainly one of the most easy to understand, because it basically says that white Americans, particularly white American males, who are not filthy rich and are not in positions of power, and don't have the financial resources that their fathers or grandfathers had, are, they feel threatened. So the combination of growing populations of minorities, as well as the increased assertion of their rights by these groups, and at the same time the assertion of women's rights, is posing a further threat to the dwindling place of the white American male in the United States. And the stagnation of wages is making this feel felt in the wallet. And I think it's easy to understand why people with decreased purchasing power and seeing more women in working roles that fly in the face of what the traditions they're used to, and an increased Latino population, and increased, or at least perceived increased, militancy on the part of African Americans, and LGBTs and other smaller minorities. I think this is making people feel threatened. If you are bothered by the rise of Trump, though, the plus side of this is that this demographic change should at some point politically overwhelm the scared white men. Though we may think it is only natural for these people to be afraid of these demographic changes, we might also wonder why it's natural, and why these people can't see the real causes of these of say wage stagnation. And I don't know what it is specifically about the demographic changes that is so threatening. And I certainly don't. I can never understand. I don't understand why women having more money and more of a role in society at large is scary. I have no idea. But there's definitely a fear here, and a desire to return to organic society that is just barely gone. And I don't know why I don't feel that need, and I know a lot of people do, but it's always mystifying to me that there are people who really believe that the past was better and we should go back to it. Anyone who promises to go back to it should be listened to, because your past wasn't better. I mean, maybe specifically for some of you it was, but for the vast majority of it, it was not. And I don't just mean your own personal past, but the past of your society. And that is a actual fact. For me, none of the theories that I've talked about so far quite get to the reason for the rise of Trump and for the rise of similar people like Trump in other representative democracies around the world. I believe that many of the theories I've talked about do add to our understanding, not all of them, and some of them complement each other, but they don't explain why people at bottom can be appealed to by someone who makes broad, blatantly overly simplistic statements, most of which are also clearly untrue, easily debunkable, or fanciful pipe dreams. And this is even more true in the age of search engines, when we can all fact check this ourselves, and who includes a huge degree of hate and resentment as part of his politics. I mean, the United States is a country that has enjoyed more financial prosperity than any other country, certainly any country of its size, in history, which has been the model for successful democratic government, which has led the world in technological progress, and which had in the past a civil society that was the envy of the world. What the hell happened? There is a theory that explains why people like Trump's rhetoric and why, and this theory doesn't rely on understanding of the American political situation in 2016, actually, demographically, economically, or what have you. It doesn't rely on context. And this theory also doesn't rely on deciding people have somehow become more fascistic over time or have been primed for fascism in a mystical way that we don't understand. This theory is called the just world fallacy. It is the fallacious belief held by many people, if not most people, certainly in North America, that the world is actually a fair place. The just world fallacy holds that most, if not all of us, subconsciously believe that life is fair, specifically that life is fair towards us. When we are confronted with the reality of our inherently unfair world, we try to explain that the unfairness, and we try to explain away the unfairness, and most often we do this by blaming other people for upsetting the true fairness of the world. We often blame the victims of misfortune, and more often than not, people we don't know, whom we can view as other or somehow inhuman or dehumanized. It was these victims' failures to follow the rules of our fair world that has resulted in this unfair situation that is either affecting us directly or is injustice we cannot ignore. Trump promises to make America great again. He promises to restore the white male American to his previous glory. He promises to return the country to a glorious past that has never existed. He promises an America that is predominantly white and very much a man's world. His supporters blame illegal immigrants, people who have traveled hundreds or even thousands of miles, often on foot, just for shitty manual labor jobs and agricultural work, for stealing their jobs, even when Mexican illegals have been leaving the country recently for jobs in Mexico. His supporters blame Islam, a religion that has not been this culturally ascendant since the Middle Ages, for the disasters of American foreign policy and the U.S.'s active meddling in the Muslim world for, the last 60 years or so. His supporters blame women for wrecking their families and causing poverty, social confusion, and the like. His supporters blame immigrants and minorities for taking their jobs and also introducing barbaric cultural practices that are eroding the moral fabric of U.S. society. The Trump supporter has less money than his parents and grandparents did. His purchasing power is greatly diminished. His house, if he can afford one, is smaller and probably mortgaged. His car is more modern but doesn't last as long, nor do his appliances. And people don't look like him anymore. The people he's seen on TV causing the world's problems are now in his town or even in his neighborhood, and now one of them is president. Life wasn't supposed to be like this. Life was supposed to be sunshine and rainbows. The United States is the greatest country on earth. It's not just the fact, it's destined as royal has been bestowed on America by God. The world as it should be is a world where the USA is the most important, freest, and most righteous country on earth. This is how the world is supposed to be. But something is making it feel like that's not true anymore. How is this possible? I mean, it can't be the Trump supporters' fault. He hasn't caused this unbalancing of the world. He is American. The world in history and God favored his grandparents and his parents. Why does the world appear to be failing him? Every single one of us holds irrational beliefs that help us comprehend the complex world we live in simpler, more digestible ways. Every single one of us irrationally defends our most closely held irrational beliefs to some degree. Nobody is free from this. When the world changes and contradicts these closely held irrational beliefs, we react. Some of us, usually the university educated, try to find out what's causing the problem by thinking things through, asking questions, and so forth. Most, if not all of us, still try to make our answers to the problem or problems fit our own irrational narratives and prejudices. But for people who aren't skeptical, who never got the chance to be taught how to think critically, this isn't an option. And we should note, even people who are taught to think critically erect elaborate, inconceivable explanations to explain away things they don't want to accept as true or can't understand. In fact, research into the just world fallacy shows that university education doesn't help remove the belief that the world is fair. The theory is based on initial studies of university students, not the regular population. These folks are inclined to see the world in a certain light that some of us view as simplistic. When the world changes, the explanations for the change are simplistic, and the solutions to stop that change are too. We humans believe to some degree or other that the world is fair towards us. The United States' role in the world and its financial prosperity have both appeared to many Americans as proof that the world is fair towards Americans. Now, as Americans confront numerous social, economic, and political problems, they need someone to blame. And the just world fallacy theory states that they will blame the less fortunate. The political and potentially economic decline in the United States is the fault of welfare moms, Mexican immigrants, Muslims, both home and abroad, and in the White House, unionized workers, black people who antagonize the police, who are just trying to do their jobs, and anyone else who has not complied with the unwritten and unspoken American contract of how to be a true American patriot, and so who deserves all that's coming to them. It is certainly not the fault of rich gamblers like Donald Trump.